John, thanks for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's awesome
Yeah,
to be
man.
here with you, Ian.
Yeah, I felt bad for John. I kept on bugging him because I was seeing what he was posting. I was like, man, this is right in alignment with what we're talking about. And he
Yeah.
was so gracious and patient with me for dealing with all my messages. But John is the co-founder of Voltage Marketing. Tell us a little bit about what Voltage Marketing is doing.
Yeah, so we primarily work with marketing leaders to help them be able to show marketing impact. We found that marketing operations, one of our primary goals is to help a marketing leader understand what marketing activities they're doing are impacting the business. And that's what helps them basically do their job more effectively. So we've created systems and processes to help them do that. And primarily it starts around and centers around the marketing automation systems. So we help our clients with their marketing automation platforms.
Yeah, we see that with MOPS, right? Like MOPS quickly scaled in the last 10 years, I think in part because it helped plug everything together and it allowed teams to really work together. And so it kind of always does start with the marketing automation platform because it's an easy way to clean up data, to manage data and things of that sort.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's for a lot of companies, it's the first entry point into the data journey for the company
Yeah.
when somebody comes in. And so it's really important to make sure that you get it right so that everything else downstream looks better and can actually be usable by the company.
That's right. So how do you help companies work together? Because I mean, as you've probably have experienced and I've experienced, like companies really work in silos. It's just for whatever
Yeah.
reason, just that's where people go. And the MOPS role isn't just this data cleanup and plugging in systems. It's sometimes somewhat of a counselor. It's like, how do we get people to like talk together?
Yeah, I think there's levels of evolution for marketing operations. I mean, you everybody has to learn the skill set. That's usually what they start out doing. But then as you get more senior and you start realizing, hey, I can do all these really cool things that are meaningful to the business, you realize that nobody wants to hear it because you don't know how to talk to people. You've been so focused on learning a tool, you just some people do, but I'll just say that this is a common path that I've heard in the journey. So,
Yeah.
and to your point, like a lot of departments just inherently are siloed because they don't have to go outside of their job to be successful. So that's one of the challenges we realize at Voltage Marketing when we work with clients is that if we are going to make any sort of impact at the company, we have to help the client break down some of those silos. And the very first thing that I recommend to anybody, and this is like I've learned this after 8 years doing this, is that the relationships that you have are the first most important step that you can take whenever you come into a new company where you're doing this type of work. You need to have strong relationships built and work towards breaking down those silos from the very beginning.
Mhm.
Otherwise, by the time you get there, you're going to have an uphill journey trying to bring your other business partners on board. You can't expect them to do it, so you need to be proactive and do it.
Yeah. And that's why agencies are so helpful, right? It's that it's a third party that can come in and kind of break those silos and be that proactive person where, what's in place is kind of hard to do when you're internal. You've been on
Yeah.
you've been on the um, kind of on the client side. So you've worked in house, and now
Yeah.
you're doing this. So tell us a little bit about the like what you were doing in house, how you approached attribution, what that all looked like.
Yeah. So I've worked at a variety of different size companies when I was working in house. The very first company I worked for was a Fortune 500 company. It was traded on the New York Stock Exchange. That company had no attribution whatsoever.
Yeah.
There was a smaller company that I went to that was 700-800 person company that they had attribution to some degree, but it was very like just it wasn't very systemized when I came in. And then I went to a smaller startup. I kind of just kept going down and down and
Yeah.
down in company size in my journey. Um, because that's what I was drawn to. And the last company that I worked for in-house was a Series B startup, and they did have some attribution pieces put together, but we wanted to make things better. And it actually, we ran into some very big pitfalls as we were focused on trying to improve that process while I was working there. But yeah, I mean, that in the short of it, that's my journey. There was various attribution models all across the board. I worked on it to varying degrees at each of those companies. Each
Yeah.
company needed different things because of where they were at during the time. And then now, as a consultant, this is honestly one of the primary things that I find I'm working with on the clients that I work with.
Yeah, I want to kind of highlight this real quick for those who are listening. The large organizations, sometimes when they are able to sell just for the sake of selling,
Yeah.
like attribution kind of gets lost, and that's not okay. Because I think that's why a lot of them are trying to do it now, and it's hard because they have so much data because they're so massive. They have data
Yeah.
in every place possible, and they're trying to get it all figured out now. But when you grow and you become a Fortune 500 company, it's like, and you didn't have that infrastructure on data, you're going to miss out on AI. You're going to miss out on, predictive modeling. You're going to miss out on a lot of things because you didn't have an infrastructure, which I think attribution brings. But
Yep.
you see that sometimes with enterprise organizations. Like, there's just nothing there. We were able to sell, and then they hit the ceiling of where they're at, and they're now trying to figure out how do we get past that. And it's like, well, if you had this structure, you could do that. Where as you kind of went further down, you're able to build out, do different things. You
Yeah.
mentioned at that some of the rub with some of the smaller company and what was running that. Can you break that down a little bit more of like what you were experiencing as far as you try to do attribution, how you try to communicate that, how things were defined?
Yeah. You're talking about at the Series B?
Yeah,
Break
the
that
Series
down a little
B.
bit more? Yeah, the Series
Yeah.
B startup. Yeah. Yeah. So when I got to the Series B startup, it was an interesting time. Like, it was a new marketing team that was there. I was marketer number 2 that was being added to the team. And we had a new marketing leader that was brought on board. And I'll be honest, the team that I was with was awesome. But one of the things that we ended up realizing when they were in there, like most things, the system's broken. It's not functioning. Marketo and Salesforce weren't talking together the way that we needed them to. There was issues with routing. And then there was issues because there was issues with the order of operations with leads. There was also issues with the source setup, and just nobody can make heads or tails of it. So
Yeah.
we realized that we needed to have a system for tracking. But what that ended up turning into is it ended up turning into an over-indexing
Mm.
on trying to create this perfect attribution system, which I think is one of the biggest pitfalls that companies can run into, especially if you're a Series B startup. If you're the larger company, you probably
Yeah.
have more time and more resources to jump
More. Yeah.
into that more robust system. But if you're a Series B startup, you don't have the time to do that. So what ended up happening is we were trying to package together this perfect attribution system that accounted for a cookieless world. Like, somebody comes in and they don't have cookies tracked, and so that we could make sure that we could still get that source on there. We spent a ton of time there, and then just defining things. We did some things right. Actually, I want to clarify. The thing we did right was actually pull all of the go-to-market teams together when we were defining
There you go.
attribution and how this was going to work. That actually was awesome. Which helped break down some of those silos. But we were just way too complicated in the execution of it, and trying to
Mhm.
just get all the little nuances to be right, and making sure that it was telling us the correct story instead of just trying to get something that's good enough to make decisions based off of.
Yeah.
So I was there 11 months at that company, and we spent, gonna say 6 to 8 months trying to, like, attribution was very heavy up as a part of that. What the result was at the very end of those 6 to 8 months, and I'm not going to put it all on this because marketing was bigger than just me working on attribution. But, you know, I could have helped focus our efforts on things that would have been a lot more impactful to the company. But at the end of that 8-month period of time, the business wasn't doing good and the revenue wasn't going up, and we didn't know why. And marketing, as is typically the case when you don't have clear visibility and you spend things on the wrong time, they got the fall. They took the X. It was
Absolutely.
our
Yeah.
fault. And because we didn't prioritize, we prioritized the wrong things. So there's a lesson to be learned there that perfection is not what you always should be doing. I mean, based off your company size, when you're trying to do attribution, you need to be cognizant of what time and resources you need to put into attribution at the stage that your company is currently at.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's so key. Um, One piece of that I want to highlight, and this is kind of zooming out from what you were sharing, is do not get so stuck in percentages and how to distribute that, and kind of what you were saying, John, like this perfect modeling. Sometimes
Yeah.
what I like to do is look, you have 100%, and look at it from like a point perspective rather than a percentage perspective, because percentages to me are really confusing, because you're assigning percentages to a dollar amount, and that dollar amount is going to be different than the other dollar amount, and so percentages get really confusing. And so
Yeah.
sometimes it's helpful just look at points. So if you have 100 points and we're using a linear model, and you're only given 100 to go off of
Yeah.
so everyone gets a single point. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, like that doesn't really change. I mean, you could have 50 points on the next deal, but you still have 100, so that's 2, and so that means a campaign ends up with 3 points. And that
Yeah.
to me begins to really simplify, rather than trying to use these percentages and try to do all this. Now, it doesn't say linear is the right move or this or that, but when you look at it from a point perspective rather than a percentage perspective, I sometimes start that than the percentages, because solely when you're looking at it on a dashboard, percentages are really confusing, right? Because
Yeah.
you're just trying to understand what's the effectiveness of my campaign as far as engagement, or whatever it may be. And it's sometimes helpful to do that, and then start looking at percentages when it comes to like ROI, things of that sort. So it's knowing where to reinvest your dollars. Now,
Yeah.
there's not unique to your case, but it's just at a high level, like that's sometimes the complexities that get rolled into it, is like trying to find this perfect thing, rather than, what, we're going to go linear, we're going to look at the points and just see what's working here, right? And
Yeah.
go from there. And that so that's just a little free consulting for whoever's listening on attribution, right?
For sure.
So you obviously have a ton of experience within an in-house, and then you've moved to your own consulting firm within Voltage Marketing. What are you working on now? What are you seeing now? How have things changed? I mean,
Yeah.
technology and software continues to grow and change.
Yeah. Well, it's actually one of the biggest gaps I see with companies. Technology and software evolves much more quickly than the adoption of companies.
Mm,
Almost every company I've ever been at has been extremely behind the curve of what would be, I would say, like the up to up to current events with this where technology is at the current time. And maybe some of that skewed because when you hear experts talk on calls like this or on a podcast or something like that, you're like, oh wow, they're doing so good. But then when you get down to the brass tacks, you're like, oh, I'm actually doing better than I thought I was. But um, anyways, technology definitely revolves much more quickly than companies' ability to implement that technology. And so what I'm doing for my clients right now is, I mean, they're no different, honestly, is just keeping things simple to start off with. It does you no good to have something that's super complex, even if your simple model that you end up starting off with has a ton of assumptions with it that maybe aren't giving credit to something. Um, it's with my clients, I try to keep it simple because they're only able to use the attribution that they understand. And if you can't understand it, the marketing leader can't understand it, there's no way that the board's going to understand it, and then there's no way it's going to be useful to the company anyways. So that's really where I start with my clients, is keeping things just as simple as possible. And honestly, I start with source attribution from the very get-go. Let's be able to tell the story of what was that first touch, what was that last touch, and what was the last touch before somebody became an opportunity. And I set up automated processes with all of my clients to make sure that that's as simple as possible, and then layer on self-reported attribution. Like, that's level one. Let's get you here. And I find that most of the clients, when I start working with them, that's all they can handle. They're not
Yeah.
ready to move beyond that.
That's a good call out, because people can go out and buy software. And I would even do this when I was consulting on software. I would say, make sure you still have all, like exactly what you said, make sure you still have all the self-reported setup in place.
Yeah.
Because if something comes down and you don't, you're not hitting revenue like you think, and your CMO comes back and says, we got to get rid of this product because it costs too much.
Yeah.
You need something, all right? You have to have the foundation. You still need those things in place. Even if you have a great tool that's going to be able to do everything for you, like, you need true operational excellence on those things. And it's really not that hard if you're using a good automation platform, like Marketo, HubSpot, like all those like are able to do that for you nowadays. And so that's a great call out. Like, that's so essential, just from early stage attribution to, if you just went out and bought a ton of attribution, or bought a tool and spent a ton of money on it, like, still do those things. I think it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah. Well, and I think my experience, and I definitely will not say my experience is like for everybody, but it just so happens to be that the clients that I work with, they happen to be these clients that are, they're at level 1 or level 0 for their adoption of these marketing automation platforms. So, is this right for more mature companies? I'm sure you can go deeper for more mature companies, but for the base companies, like the companies that I'm working with, like, those foundational pieces are essential. And honestly, it's actually helped. So one of my clients, we set this up for them. Events was their primary source of where they got new leads from, and they were using HubSpot. And anybody that uses HubSpot knows that events, HubSpot sucks out of the box, because it just brings everything in as offline events, and then you got to try to find out where the hell that came from, and you have no idea. So you have to set something custom up for that. So we set up a base source tracking that was custom for them, that would give them their first touch, their last touch. And when we set that up, they were finally able to tell the board, like, it's finally able to connect some dots and start showing some influence on that, the activities that they were doing. There's a lot of things that influence those people along the way that we just don't have visibility into right now. But at least for that first level, they were able to tell a story that was helpful. And that story actually enabled them to get more budget, which this was last year. It was for Q4, which is a time when a lot of teams were really struggling to get more budget. But because they started getting that visibility, they were able to get that, which is that's what every marketing leader's dream is like being able to tell a good story so that they can get the resources they need to continue performing.
Yeah, that's excellent. And like, it's a good call out on like how we define attribution, right? Because, you and I were talking beforehand, and, you could be scrolling through LinkedIn and someone could post about multi-touch attribution or attribution, and you're going to have a very specific definition of what that means. I'm going to have a very specific definition. Everyone has a unique definition. I mean, shoot, this podcast has, 27, conversations now about attribution, and no one has it as the same, right? Because everyone defines it differently. So that's such a great call up, because there's also a maturity involved in that too, of like, look, setting up campaign attribution within HubSpot or within Salesforce just to understand, to find a source has a value to it. And then you have self-reported attribution that has a value to it. You have multi-touch attribution software that has value, but there's a maturity to that as well, to as what you're getting at, right? If you're
Yeah.
early young company, you're not going to have to, you don't go out and buy a multi-touch attribution. Don't go out and buy a media mix model. Like, just get the
Yeah.
basics in place so you can show your value, report on ROI, bring in the value to marketing, and then scale from there. And where I
Yeah.
think MTA comes in, I'd be curious to hear your perspective on this, but to me, multi-touch attribution really is the value of understanding the entire customer journey.
Hmm.
Yes, you can report back on ROI on that, but it is, especially in the B2B world, the entire account perspective of saying, okay, there's 500 people in this massive Fortune 500 company that are engaging with us via website, via our events, for our webinars. How do we understand all of that within our go-to-market, right? How do we just put that all together? And I think that's what
Yeah.
those softwares do for us, right?
Yeah. Help provide that visibility. I mean, that to me is what we're trying to get insights into so that we can make informed decisions. Um, I feel like I feel like this is something that's, it's part science and it's also part intuition. I was reading
Yeah,
this morning. I don't know if you're familiar with Hockey Stack at all.
yeah,
They're
yeah,
making waves across LinkedIn right now.
yeah,
But anyways, their CEO had a post this morning that was talking about it, about intuition and analytics. Um, and honestly, I feel like when it comes to this, yes, the tools are extremely valuable to get us those insights, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to be better marketers. We're trying to
yeah,
be able to prove the impact of what it is that we're doing. And then there's a little bit at the end of the day, I think the numbers get you to a certain point, and then there's the intuition that comes in and can carry things home for you to make sure that you are interpreting the data right. Or if you see anomalies, your intuition can help you understand what those anomalies are.
yeah.
And sometimes I think it gets lost actually. Um, but I also don't think that you can just rely on intuition either, which kind of like the flip side of the coin. So,
Sure. Yeah.
but those two together, I think really kind of just send this, like, you're a really potent combination when you have those two things combined.
Yeah, I think it shows the value of having someone who truly owns that aspect of the data, right?
Yeah.
Um, there was a huge wave of of everyone becoming a data analyst, right? And it's just like this overflow of jobs, and it's like that's great, but like, do you have the
Yeah.
ability to have like that gut instinct on the data that you're seeing? Like, sure, you can, write the SQL query. Sure, you can do all these things, and you can, put it into a beautiful image and all this, but
Yeah.
can you really interpret that and like own that data, like live and breathe and within that data? And you need that for attribution, because if you're solely like a data engineer and then you come into a multi-touch attribution model of some sort, you have no idea of like what the past was, what you're like, you
Yeah.
don't have any intuition of what that is. So you really need someone who can like own that. And I think that's where companies like Voltage Marketing, other um, other companies that are third parties can come in, and because you have someone who's like lived and breathed in a certain sector. I mean,
Yeah.
Adobe does that as well, and you can and bring some insight and intuition into things. Whereas if your team is too small and you can only afford a data analyst, but that's a data analyst for everything,
Yep.
it's going to be really hard for them to have a gut on that, right? And so it's just really
Yep.
valuable to have someone who can and truly understand the value of that and have a kind of a relationship with that data.
Definitely. Yes. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good, man. Well, John, thanks for being on Attribution Time today. This is a great conversation. I hope, hopefully, a lot of people got information out of this. I think is good perspective, especially with smaller companies. Hey, don't try to go all in. Don't put all your chips in and try to buy tools. Like, there's things that you can do now to get attribution to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, I think if I were to try to summarize some of the things we talked about today and just my perception or perspective on attribution, relationships first. You got to break down those silos within the company. That absolutely is like the number one place to start whenever you're setting out on this journey. And if you're already on the journey or in the middle of the journey, start building those bridges now by interviewing the other members of the go-to-market team, let them know what you're working on, because your reporting will mean nothing if you don't have those other members on board. So I think that's like the first step, is your relationships with your other team members. And then the second thing I'd say is, honestly, you don't need to go and do what everybody else is doing for attribution. Start with where you are based off of the size of company and the maturity that you're at. Makes no sense for you to boil the ocean when you're starting just from ground zero and you have nothing. Like, start small and then grow bigger from there. And then I think the third thing, like you mentioned, is that honestly, the term attribution means so many different things to so many different people. So sometimes it probably makes sense to double click on it when you're having that conversation with people, to make sure that you're both understanding what it is that you mean by attribution. I think that goes back to the first step of, as you're talking to the different team members across the company, when you guys have that conversation of what attribution is, you can bring everybody onto the same page.
That's right. I couldn't have said it better. Thanks, John. Appreciate you being on today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. This was fun, and I love this topic and conversation. It's definitely a hot, heated one, and I think it's not going away anytime soon, since it's so critical to everything that we all do.
Agreed. Yeah. And for those who want to work with John, I'll put his LinkedIn in the comment section or in the description below, so you guys can follow and reach out to him.
Yeah, love connecting with anybody. Feel free to reach out.